This is Kat Sturtz from rockingyourpath.com, and it's another episode of Fast Action Fridays. We do this every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, and my special guest today is Cindy Freeman from across Lake Michigan from me, and she's got a really cool resume, does a lot of things, including she's the host of Purpose Talk Radio. She's an experienced copywriter and editor, and we're going to talk about grammar gremlins today. And for those who are new, the first 15 minutes, we're going to do quick introductions, quick intro of the topic, which I just did, and get our fast action tips, which you can start putting into practice in 15 minutes or less. And then we'll continue for 15 minutes on a bonus Q&A and be done by 11 o'clock. So let me tell you a little bit more about me. I am the owner of rockingyourpath.com, Fast Action Fridays, and the Business to Success programs. I work with, I show writers and artists, coaches and consultants, and other service-based professionals who are eager to start and grow a profitable, small or home-based business, how to find more time, more money, and more resources to rock their unique path, how to overcome obstacles and hidden barriers, and how to prosper with passion and purpose. And while I don't always include this in my bio introduction, I am also the award-winning nonfiction author of the Young Writer's Guide to Getting Published, which went through 6 different editions from 1986 through 2001 or 2003, and the last 4 editions were published by Writer's Digest Books, the largest publisher of how to write and publish books. So yeah, I know my grammar pretty well too.
Yes.
Cindy,
we've had a few discussions on that.
right. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Cindy, okay? She knew at a young age that she wanted to be a writer, which is completely opposite from me, who backed into it as an adult. Her high school newspaper offered her the opportunity to try her hand as a news and feature writer, photographer, and copy editor. And then in college, she majored in print journalism and spent the next 15 years working for weekly and daily newspapers. And after that, she used her business administration minor in office positions, where each had a writing component to it. And most of Cindy's adult life has been spent working for others as an employee while working for herself in network marketing companies and aspects of communication. And it goes on from there. I'm going to include more of it in the blog post later. But a couple of things to point out here. I always wrote, even as a child, but never thought of writing as a career. But I did recognize it as an important component of whatever career you go in. I didn't get my business administration bachelor's degree, didn't even start college until my mid-40s when my youngest was a sophomore, and got my degree when I was 58. And still, before that, I was teaching college credit courses. I was teaching GED English for the local school systems without a college degree, without having ever been a student, but they recognized that I knew what I was talking about, and the schools applied for special clearance for me to teach. I would have been a renegade as a traditional teacher, though, that's for sure. Cindy, why is paying attention to grammar important for professionals, whether you are self-employed or working for someone else, or just sharing your stuff as a real-life person on social media? Why is it important?
Just like someone judges you on appearance at first glance, they're going to judge you on how you're speaking, how you're writing, how you're appearing. If you're going to give a casual, lackadaisical presentation, especially on business pages and social media, that's how people are going to judge you. And that, to me, when I see some of that, I think there's a lack of professionalism in what they do. Because there's enough ways out there that you can use spell checks, grammar checks, another person to look at your stuff now, that there really isn't a lot of reason for obvious misspellings or miscommunications.
Absolutely. And I had someone tell me the other day, well, my target market really doesn't care about grammar. And that's fine, but you do. And if you're struggling in your business, the people you're attracting that may not know grammar, how are these people who don't value learning and improving their skills? I still say it's about what you want to project and not just about other people. And that's allowing for mistakes and typos and autocorrect, which gets the best of us all the time because it seems not to correct until after I've hit the button. But there are obvious things that we need to pay attention to. And I know you've got some tips for us. So what are they? Share them with us.
Well, one of the things, of course, is to use your grammar and your spell checkers because they are out there. But don't totally rely on them. Make sure you read through it, especially if it is a long format, a paper you're presenting to someone. Your resume, don't let resumes go through without someone looking at them, or an application or a grant. A lot of times grant writers go through, or grant recipients will look at something and they will toss it if it doesn't make sense and it's incorrect, because they really do look at the professionalism.
Absolutely. And grammar, we've talked about this because you and I have had long conversations either in writing or live on the phone or in another medium. Autocorrect, spelling, and grammar checks, they are useful tools, but you can't just rely on them because they often, especially the spelling and grammar checks, will let things go by that are really wrong. I mean, if it's spelled right and you're using the wrong word, that's a problem. And if right,
that happens a lot with our homonyms and our synonyms. They're close, may not.
Yeah, I was watching a webinar just yesterday, or the day before yesterday. Big name guru. His programs are $10,000 and up, and he had a slide that had the word compliment spelled with an I, like, I'm complimenting Cindy on her writing skills. It was the only word on the slide, and he was telling how important it was to make sure that your freebie offer and all of your programs and services complement the business you're in. Well, the word he meant was compliment with an E, to bring something that helps make it whole or improves the other part. And it just blew my mind that someone in that position would make such an obvious error. Spelling check would not have helped him. A grammar checker would not have helped him. He needed to know the difference in that word. Yeah. What else can you tell us? What other tips, and what should we watch for?
Actually, that one kind of brings me to one of my other ones, which is find some mnemonic devices if you don't know what it is. Compliment, in this case, like you were talking about, complete. Look at how that is used. The one that I see very often is the there, the twos. It's there. It equates to here. Okay, the locations. You can spell it that way. Well, although then we got here and here to think about too. But, there being like heir, H-E-I-R, an ownership. And it's not pronounced there when you put the apostrophe in, it's there, not, as everybody pronounces it. That's the other piece of it. Think of those apostrophes as letters missing. And just find something that might clue you in. If you're saying too much, that much, most often you're going to have two O's in it. Just some simple things that might help you remember. Put it into a song, do something. I will not use affect and effect. I'll be real honest. I cannot keep them straight. I have tried mnemonics. I've tried everything. So even someone like me that writes a lot, I'll find
we
some other way.
all have our nemesis words, don't we? Yeah. Yep. And how hard is it to do a quick check. I like to use the thesaurus to check my spelling sometimes, and to also make sure that the version of the word I'm using is there. And if you get at least the first few letters correct, you can find the word. It's going to be suggested as a word, and click it, right click it if you're using a mouse or a touchpad, and look at the offerings there. Still, one of the best books ever written about grammar, punctuation, words to watch out for is this little bitty book. I believe it's still under $6. I think I got mine for $2 when I was in high school back in the Stone Ages. And it is William Strunk Jr.'s and E.B. White. That's the author of Charlotte's Web, for those who don't know, called The Elements of Style. And simple to use. I still reference it because I like things to be not only correct, but easy for people to understand. And that's where, let's go to grammar and punctuation a little bit. I'm much more flexible on allowing informal sentences than some maybe people with masters in English are. But you really have to pay attention to who your audience is in that case, don't you?
Exactly. And that is one of them. Pay attention to the audience. Find out what their priorities are. The trend really has been to the dangling participle thing, ending the sentence, where am I going to? Where am I coming from? And ending the sentences with that format. And it's become casual. It's been allowed in some forms of writing. Again, if you're doing your dissertation, you don't want to see
really
it there.
do. You pointed this out. You really do need someone else to look at your writing. The more important it is for the piece that you're sending out, the more important it is to have fresh eyes and knowledgeable eyes look at it. Because when we reread our own work, we read what we intended to write often. And we're so familiar with what's there. There are memes now going around, and they have been on Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and stuff, where it's showing sentences. If you can read this, and the words are all jumbled, but consider this. If you didn't know the words in the first place, could you still read it? And the same thing with the ones going around now that are all about the shapes. I happened to be in elementary school when they introduced drawing the lines around the shape of words, as if that was supposed to help us read. Now, I was already reading them, so I blew through the things, but you still have to understand what the word was to begin with to be able to make those associations, right?
Right. Even in sign language, we do the similar thing. They say, if you can't read the finger spelling, think of the hand shapes. So you're right. In some of that English, you can think of that, but that's
all right.
A reading
So you
format.
Just brought up an important part. You are a sign language interpreter. Is that how you say that? You were a student, but you can do it pretty well, right?
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that sign language is not just interpreting a language, a vocal language. It is a language of its own. So how does grammar and spelling fit into that world?
Very differently. Very often, someone who's not been able to hear means they have not learned English and grammar and structure from that, because American Sign Language has its own structure and its own format, closer to, they say often, the French or the Spanish word order for sentences. Therefore, for someone who is deaf or hard of hearing to try to correlate back to an English when you see their writing, I call it somewhat deaf-ease, and I can tell if someone has grown up in that culture versus English culture.
Right. And I am more flexible in judging people. And some people say you never judge. Well, we have to discriminate, and discrimination on who I want to work with, or as our wizard in our sidebar, with whom I would like to work, you have to pick and choose, and that takes discrimination of a type. And I'm not going to just work with anybody, so who am I going to weed out of consideration? Someone who is always writing certain things wrong, I'm not going to consider them for a VA position if I want that position to be someone who can copy edit my work, proofread my work. If I have no confidence that they're going to catch my mistakes, why would I hire that person? Right?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
I was going to also point out, I spent 6 years almost tutoring South Koreans in conversational English. No, I don't speak Korean. They're all schooled in English. And when you learn the culture of another language, you realize that their rules for grammar, spelling, punctuation are different. So I do give more leeway to people whose mother language, native language, is different than my own American English. There are a lot of languages like Korean that have very few adjectives and adverbs, that don't rely on tense of a verb to express things. You're supposed to get it from the context of what's being said. So that's why when you read a lot or hear them, the tense of a verb is incorrect. But I also know that those people knew how important it was in business to succeed, to get their English right, which is why they were such eager students of conversational English and business English. I wish more Americans were that diligent and eager to learn more.
I had a friend that taught ESL also, and she said the same thing. The Asian population was her main client, main consumers, because they do want to feel like they need to fit in and not stand out in any way.
Mm-hmm. Do you have more tips for us, or more gremlin type words or phrases or usages?
Well, the one I think, and we kind of touched on this also, where was I going? Sorry. Oh, if you don't know how to use the word, or not sure if you know it right, change the sentence, change the structure, change whatever you need to do to make it fit what you know is correct. Don't try to use big words. Don't try to fit into something that is not you. Also, as part of that is you let your personality flow through a little bit on it.
Absolutely. Can you give us some examples of words or phrases that are really prevalent, or that maybe trip you up too? And while you're thinking of that, I will admit I have rewritten many a thing because I couldn't figure out the right grammar to use or the right word. So you just rewrite,
I think the one that I use the most is the affect defect. I will change it to the word impact or influence, because no matter how much I look it up, and noun, verb, whatever, I will look it up. I will stare at it, forget it. Why take the time and put in the word that I know means exactly what I want it to do, instead of having to worry about two other little words. There are only 2 words in my vocabulary. They can sit over there.
One of the ones, there's 2 that really bug me, and I don't do these, but they bristle at me when I see other people. And that's someone who's proclaims to be a social media expert or a business expert, and they misuse the word its, I-T-S. IT apostrophe S is a contraction that means it is. If it's being used as a possessive, then there's no apostrophe, and that one bugs me. The other one that really bugs me, and I seem to be the only one in the whole wide world, is we've lost the word who in conversation or in writing. They've replaced it. So many people have replaced it with the word that. But when it's referring to people, I like to use the word who. Who did this, or whom when it's appropriate, right? And then
Right.
Then there are the rules that aren't really rules, that were just English teachers getting on their high horse, and that's things like never ending a sentence with a preposition. That was never a formal grammar rule, ever, 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 but it was something drummed into us as something to avoid at all costs in elementary and high school, right?
Exactly. And I still, if I can do it, it changes, and I will reword it. And sometimes it's a little too awkward, so I'll go back to the casual.
Wow.
But yeah.
What happens on your radio show? I mean, are there any obvious problems with the guests and their speaking, or are people more careful when they're in a guest interviewee position?
That's a really good question. I don't think, and maybe it's the caliber or the people that I have had on, although I don't care what level of purpose you're living. I think the radio show allows people to be a little more casual, because I do just a back and forth interview, even like we're doing now. Yes, I'm watching what I'm saying because we're talking about grammar. And yet I know there's a little bit of hedging and things like that, that if someone transcribed this, I'd be seeing all of those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe for you, I think even too, when I've listened to your blabs, I think people do seem to a lot for a little more casual on something of this format.
And it is a very informal format, much different than a scheduled webinar or teleseminar where we are deliberately following an agenda, not necessarily a script, because that makes it way too, doesn't allow for that interaction that we love blab for, right? All right.
Another one of the ones that I know has changed over the years is we used to do he or she. Now it's become there, and I had to look that up. Because I was in a lounge one day and listening to people talk about this, and in a dissertation of formal, it's still he, she, but if you don't know the gender, it's become
and
there.
that's because that brings up a really good point, because language is not static. Language has a life to it, and it evolves over time. That's why we have new words that are added to our dictionaries over time, or new words that are invented. And the use of language, the grammar of it, and what's proper changes over time too, out of need. Now I don't always remember firefighters. I had a struggle for that word the other day when everything in me wanted to write firemen, and firemen and firewomen just didn't sound right. I knew there was another term for it, but like you said, rather than what would be a good cluttering up our writing or our speaking, saying he/she or she/he, we've gone to using there for the pronoun as we go further along. And that political correctness really screwed people up a lot with their choice of words, and again, in the grammar usage there. Yeah.
I'll give you my two biggest, I think, pet peeves, just for one is the word towards with an S that keeps sneaking into everything. And yes, again, it's in the dictionary, but it says right there, careful people don't use it. Careful writers, and the word ain't is similar on that. It's you go towards something, you go towards it. And the other is, this is slipped in, especially in advertising, is putting the cardinal endings on dates. February 27th with a TH. You're stuttering. If you think of it as you're already saying February 27th, you don't need to put the extra endings on it. And for some reason, it's come in, and it's, I don't care what grammar books you look at, it is not acceptable yet, even though it's snuck in there. And maybe someday it will. But again, depending on your audience, It's just one of those things that drives me when I edit something. Gone. So,
and I understand a lot of people are, typing from their phones and their tablets, and it is harder to do. And we're not even talking about obvious shortcuts in typing. Typing "you are" to mean "your" when you've only got 140 characters to you. We're not even referring to that, are we? Right.
No, THX. We know this thing.
Right.
So
Steve from Wizard's Place also mentioned irregardless. There is really no such word as irregardless. It's regardless. You don't need the extra IR in the beginning of that. But just, I guess our bottom line is, even if it's a simple text, I mean, if it's a private text to another person and you're not having to represent yourself professionally, okay, don't worry about it, right? And have a laugh over the autocorrects, because there have been some doozies on mine too. But if you're posting on Facebook, or you're writing an article for your blog, or you're creating a book, it's important. Take the time. Don't tell me you don't have time to do something when it's that important and could likely affect your success with that project. What are you doing without that? So yeah. Any final tips for us?
I think that's pretty much what I've got. The only other thing that I had looked at under looking at my notes, we've learned to use different punctuation. Again, colons versus semicolons versus commas, M dashes, N dashes, hyphens. Those kinds of things, again, have become more formal writing.
Those are more punctuation more than grammar.
Right, those are more punctuation, again, than the grammar pieces. But you see some of those too. So, again, look some of the things up if you need it. That's the biggest thing. Don't just assume you know what it is. If there's any doubt, ask somebody or look it up. I'd like to invite some people to one of our Facebook groups, which is Ask a Grammar Guru. And we put questions, comments, suggestions over there too. So if there's any doubt, come on, jump over there. We've got a lot of professional writers over there.
And there are some things where there is no hard and fast rule. It all depends on the format and your audience at the time. I will never be a sports writer because their lexicology just drives me up a wall, and they're inventing phrases and new ways for to express that. And I think it's hilarious, and I understand. The worst thing is for me is that I actually understand it, but I could never. It's not me. I could never reproduce it in any good way. Do you have any links to share with us?
Well, which links do you want?
Whatever you'd like to share in the sidebar.
A lot of times I look at Grammar Girl for some of my stuff, because it includes the casual as well as the formal, and compares them. Sometimes one of the ones I have to look up and how they change more than versus over, because I don't like over in some things, and they're saying, oh no, that's okay now, depending upon your format. So that's one of the ones I use a lot. Dictionary.com, which also has a thesaurus.
That's my favorite place to go, is dictionary.com. I could live there just because it's so. I'm a curious person by nature, habitually curious, creatively organized. I could live at dictionary.com. I just love it.
And I'm just asking the question.
Mycroft joined us, and he said, if I hear a biz writer say disincent one more time, I shall lose my mind. Wow, that's one I haven't come up against. What's the actual word they were going for, Mycroft? Oh, we're going to let him in. Let him bounce in here for a second. Thanks for joining us. What is the word they're after with that one?
It's pronounced disincent, as in disincentivize.
Ah, Yeah, and that you
And so what happened is they had shortened, they had truncated incentivized to incent,
mhm,
like pay packages for HR, right? And
right.
and so to disincent someone would be to to make them not want to do something, I guess. I still remember that from my days at American Express. Drives me nuts, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um,
And that would fall into business jargon, though, wouldn't it?
that's true.
Or do you think it's really that they didn't know better?
I think that language is sometimes prescriptive and sometimes it's descriptive, right? And so I think it starts out as jargon and then it turns into something all its own, and it takes on.
Right.
And there is a
And how a lot of
business
nouns
Creole,
end up being,
you know.
and there are a lot of nouns that we now use as verbs, to Google something, you know. Do you have any particular gremlins that you catch yourself making or used to make?
No, but here in Arizona, I think it's made its way around the U.S., but it seems like the plague here. And I can never remember a perfect example of this, but it's a misuse of the word witch.
As opposed to using that?
Right. It's a sort of verbal semicolon, taking two phrases that are unrelated and putting them together, and it drives me insane.
And here's the thing with something like that drives you insane. You immediately stop in your point of reading or listening, and that break in focus can make the difference between being successful in whatever it is you're trying to communicate, including making a sale. That's the point, is we don't, right, not you, but when you see this happen, we can't help ourselves. Those little things that grab us breaks the flow of the communication, and breaking the flow of communication is deadly in business, right?
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. Another reason why, which and that is one of those things I look up frequently about which one to use. See which one to use, and that was the right one. Do you? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in communicating effectively?
I'm a big fan. I think it started years ago as a kid in spelling bees and going to nationals and reading dictionaries as a kid because I was a nerd that didn't do well.
You're in good company here.
And then college, creative writing, and 4 classes shy of an English degree before I got in trouble with the early 90s crowd. Had a very liberal institution. And I told them to go bleep off, and then I went to something more quantitative, and I ended up in finance. Because there are just some things up with which I shall not put, right?
Right.
But I did have a question. I did because now I run an investment firm and business writing, blogging, that sort of thing. I try to make it, somewhat formal, but not so arcane, right? That people can't read me. But say you have a list of things and you have a colon, right? And, cars, dogs, hats, automobiles, right? And that's the list of items, right? After the colon, when you want to separate the items in the list, semicolons or commas?
The semicolon usually indicates the word and. I personally would probably drop it down into a bullet pointed list if there was room. But as Cindy says, my answer is depend. What more do you say, Cindy?
Here's a list of automobiles you might want to consider. Colon. Toyota, comma, Fiat, comma, Chevrolet. If you were doing Toyota for its long life, it would be Toyota, comma, for its long life, semicolon, Fiat, comma, whatever reason, semicolon. So it depends. If you've got just the list, it's the commas. If you have the list that includes other other commas, then you need
great example. Great example.
That's actually the best, most cogent answer I've ever gotten. So thank you.
Good.
Now, I wish I were a grammar Nazi, and I really hate that term. Because it should be more like grammar goddess or
Grammar God.
Grammar person who's spreads the sweet cream on the.
How about a grammar fairy? Can we have a grammar fairy?
Grammar fairy.
Yeah. Well, the question about the semicolon leads me to talk about the Oxford comma.
Mm-hmm.
I love the Oxford comma. It makes things so much easier to understand. I mean, I understand the use without, but of all places, our public school system here in the United States says don't use it. And then you get these sentences and people don't understand what's really going on. And Cindy knows, and some of the other followers here know, I love to catch those and display them on Facebook when a misplaced comma really screws up the understanding of what you're trying to communicate.
Truly. But what is the Oxford comma? I'm not familiar.
The Oxford comma is the comma that you place before the word and the last element in your series of items that you're including. And okay, so I had apples, oranges, comma, apples, comma, oranges, comma, and bananas. Now, that sentence, not having that last comma before and, people are still going to understand what I meant.
Right.
But that's the use of it. But sometimes, and I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but a lot of times you need that last one, especially if there's other ands in that sentence or in that series of things that you're using. Have you got a good?
It's a mistake actually in American schools today.
Oftentimes, using the Oxford comma is considered incorrect. And you really need to pick a style. When you're in school, I had to use APA format, and why the Psychology Association, their format, but you had to follow APA format. As a journalist for the many years, I was a newspaper reporter and editor, and also a freelance writer for magazines and businesses and stuff. We used the Chicago Manual of Style. So whatever they said went is how we did it.
Right.
And then you have your internal documents. What I tell people is pick a style and stick with it. Don't do it one way in one article and a different way in another article, or different ways within the same article, because that also is an unconscious disruption of your communication. Your eyes and your mind will bristle at those different changes. Cindy, have you got an example of an Oxford comma misuse? Or
for one, I know there is one. There's one about Hitler.
Oh, yeah, Hitler and the strippers. Hitler, JFK and the strippers. Yes, we invited JFK, comma Hitler. How did that go? Anyway, it was hilarious. Yeah. So one meant we invited JFK, Hitler, and strippers, and the other one literally meant that they were the strippers that we invited to, whom we invited to our party. All right. Well, we need to wrap up this section of Fast Action of Fridays. Thank you so much for joining us. Mycroft Holmes, is that your real name? Because that is awesome.
The literature lady should know otherwise, right?
I know. I was just watching Sherlock last night. It's Sherlock Holmes's older brother. I know that.
Correct. You would be amazed at who doesn't know that. I'm thankful millennials don't read. I'm originally a Google Plus beta tester, and
very cool.
And
yeah, I think if the last name had been different, I would have given Mycroft more credit as being the first name.
Right.
But that is a very cool moniker. Good for you. I am so glad my mother did not name me what I heard she was first going to name me, which was Bambi Lynn. Do I look like a Bambi Lynn to you?
But of course,
yeah. So thank God she went with Kathleen. But
Kathleen works just fine.
All right. Well, we hope you come back again. I will be back on Blab at 1:00 today with my co-host, Stephen Henry, for our Freebie Friday program. And I probably should go grab that link real quick before I sign off here. We are on, Steve and I are on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays at 1:00. We have Motivational Monday. We have What's Up Wednesdays, where we really encourage people to show up and share their own freebies and what they're working on. And then our Freebie Friday, oh, good grief. Our Freebie Fridays is just full of awesome content and offers that Steve and I find. Some of them are our own things. Some of them are things we've found from other people and have tried them out. Cindy, do you have a question for our friend from Arizona? Yeah, while I go look up this link real quick.
Yeah, okay. Since you are finance, I know there is, like we said, jargon and things like that that we use. How do you find that profession? You're creative versus the, what they say, I guess, the more mainline. Do you find that, you know, folks are using correct grammar in there, or is some things crossing over from the not so strict areas?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Arizona. So a lot of that I know is casual and little.
In my opinion, business is a Creole. In the truest sense of the word, it's a Creole. There's so much goofiness going on, and words, adjectives, adverbs, nouns. You know, and there's definitely a fluidity there. And they pick up stuff all over the place and just make stuff up. I'm convinced business English is a Creole, and I'm not happy about it personally. I think, you know, if we could go back to the 50s in a sort of, you know, idealized American Standard English period, I would happily go back in time. You know, but we can't. You know.
No, we can't. But I think there's a lot to be said about learning the basics before you go start screwing them up and adding to them. I would tell my Korean students the best part about the American language is its diversity, and that you could literally get down to communicating exactly what you meant because of the diversity of adjectives, adverbs, phrasing. And the worst thing about American English, it's its diversity, because it's so easy to screw up in other ways.
I think the worst thing about our version of English is that we don't actually have a definitive version. I think we all know something that looks like what I would call American Standard English, but because the United States doesn't actually have a national language, right?
Right.
We don't have a national language standards board like South Korea and France does.
Right. But they're smaller countries. We have to allow for a lot of diversity in terms of regions. I mean, my family's from the South. So, you know, I grew up listening to Y'all Come Back Now, You Hear, you know, and that was perfectly good grammar and English for someone from, you know, the south of part of Kentucky. And we all learned the difference between y'all and all y'all. You know, y'all refers to one person. All y'all refers to the whole group of you. You know?
Multiple plurals.
That was our grammar, you know, that we grew up with. I know that, you know.
Well,
all right.
But you didn't write that way.
Punctuate that correctly.
Yeah, that's where apostrophes get some real funky. All right. Well, I did post the link for the 1 o'clock blab for our Freebie Friday. Thank you again so much for joining us. Cindy, thank you so much. I hope to have you back. You're a frequent guest and awesome. This is Kat Sturtz from rockingyourpath.com and Fast Action Fridays, reminding you to remember to continue rocking your unique path to success.